In the spring of '62, the Missourians answered. One man in particular, perhaps the most well-known of the guerrilla leaders, Captain William Quantrill. A Buckeye from Ohio, he was thought good-natured, even-tempered. In 1855, he, at age of 18, headed west. For work, he drifted from one school teaching job to another. All the while, he particularly enjoyed two pastimes. He liked to hunt, and he enjoyed dallying with the ladies. His special preference, Indian white half-breeds. Regardless of his womanizing, he wrote regularly to his mother back in Ohio. But when his letters were not answered, he grew to resent her. While in Kansas, he defended anti-slavery free staters, even defending the notorious Jim Lane. But by 1860, he changed his mind. For their defense of abolitionist John Brown, Quantrill grew to hate anti-slavery Kansans, and that prompted his decision to leave. In 1859, he joined an expedition to Pikes Peak's gold fields, but misfortune found them. Caught in a Rocky Mountain blizzard, the expedition lost its way and most died. That experience profoundly affected him. Drifting back to Missouri, he obsessively began to wonder why, when so many had died, why he survived. Without family, with no tie to till the land, he was lonely, miserable. Then he began to reason that his being spared meant he was destined for something great. Sensing that destiny, he led a raid to Aubrey, Kansas in March of 1862. It was his first. During it, he shot his old school superintendent. Upon their return to Missouri, his men were surprised and attacked by a federal patrol near Little Santa Fe, Missouri, the night of March the 22nd. Bloodied, most escaped, but it was a lesson he never forgot. He vowed never to be surprised like that again. He knew he had to stay one step ahead of his enemy, for federal policy at that time was to treat Missouri bushwhackers like highwaymen, and that policy angered Quantrill, who believed his men soldiers and his mission a legitimate crusade. In July of 1862, he learned a Missourian had been captured and executed on the 28th of that month at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. At that very moment, he held 3 anti-slavery prisoners from a previous raid. So, to retaliate, he executed all 3. Again, Old Testament justice. No quarter, and practiced by both sides. And despite the take-no-prisoners conditions, rather than men shying away from participation, numbers and raids increased. The black flag policy that both sides practiced was the tangible and visible manifestation of unbridled hate. Guerrilla Hiram George explained his motivation this way. Jayhawkers burned and took everything I had, killed my father, hung my brother. Another who continued his lawlessness after the war, Cole Younger. He justified his brutality with, the knowledge that my father had been killed in cold blood filled my heart with the lust for vengeance. And then, from the brother of Jesse James Frank, there was a certain appeal to follow a man like Quantrill. Frank wrote, I will never forget the first time I saw him. He was nearly 6 feet in height, rather thin, his hair and mustache sandy, and he was full of life and a jolly fellow. He had none of the air of the bravado or the desperado about him. We all loved him at first sight. Quantrill's success, and for that matter, the success for all Missouri guerrillas, can be better gauged when one understands the lay of the land in Missouri and the weapon of choice they used. Across the border in Kansas, much was open prairie, but in Missouri, There were broken valleys, dense woods, hollows, thicks, and ravines. Excellent places from which to strike, escape, hide, make camp. As to a weapon, most chose the 36 caliber Navy Colt. It was light, durable, accurate. 4, 5, or 6 would be loaded and stuffed into a belt. The Federals who pursued them were usually issued one-shot carbines, sabers, and an inferior pistol that proved no match. Even the quality of mount favored the guerrilla. And those mounts carried Quantrill's men into Kansas on September the 6th, 1862. The Kansas town of Olathe, population about 1,000, was targeted. Once there, all of the men were herded into the town square while stores were looted. In the raid, 2 jayhawkers were riddled by bullet fire. Another's head was crushed by a cannonball. Yet Quantrill ordered that all women and children were to be protected. By 63, the vicious cycle of raid and retaliation was perpetual. Causes for civil war back east were here buried under mountains of personal vendettas and vengeance. Savagery which sprang from hate, and that hate spurred repeated acts of violence. I'd like to take a moment to thank everyone for listening to Threads from the National Tapestry. You know, each of these episodes is the result of hours and hours of research and preparation, and it means a great deal to me and our production team to see the likes, the comments, and views. Let me make clear that everything we do here will always be accessible to any who are curious to learn about the American Civil War. But we would like to ask you to consider to become a member, a Threads loyalist, if you will. For less than $5 each month, your support will help us to continue sharing our passion for that tumultuous yet important period of history. Joining is quite easy to do. At the top of each show description, you'll find a link, if you will, to join, whether you're watching, liking, commenting, or becoming a Threads loyalist. If you click on that link, your support for Threads from the National Tapestry will mean a great deal to me, to our team, and there's no question any contribution, your support, certainly makes a difference, and it's a wonderful acknowledgement for what we try to do. Thank you. When Quantrill learned that women had been victims, something inside him snapped. In his mind, the Federals had crossed the line that was unthinkable. Defenseless women. There would be blood. On August the 19th, his force broke camp on the Blackwater River and headed west across the border. Word reached Lawrence, Kansas, the abolitionist town, that he was coming. But the timing was such that when he didn't arrive when expected, the town relaxed. Again, it was August of 63. Gettysburg and Vicksburg had been Union victories, and those in Lawrence, believing the Confederacy was on its last legs, had allowed military exercise and nightly patrols to grow lax. Yet, on the afternoon of the 20th, Quantrill crossed into Kansas near a Union military post at Aubrey, and they were spotted. An alarm went out north and south, but curiously, not west. Also of note, the 100 cavalrymen at Aubrey failed to pursue the column. By dawn the next day, some 400 men, bent on bloody revenge, arrived on the outskirts of Lawrence, and not one citizen was aware of their presence. Within this well-known seat of anti-slave thought, some 3,000 Unionists, and even the Jayhawk leader, James Lane. It was also headquarters for the Redlegs and a haven for many fugitive slaves who had fled from or had been stolen from Missourians. It was around 5 a.m. when Sarah Fitch arose in southeastern Lawrence. Her husband, Edward, and 3 children were with her. As she moved about her home that morning, she heard a pistol shot, then another, and another. Another citizen, Erastus Ladd, heard shots, then cheers. He watched petrified African Americans run by. They were screaming, "The secesh have come." Part of Quantrill's men went straight for 22 unarmed federal recruits housed in tents. One young recruit, maybe 15, ran for his life. Bullets cut up the ground as he raced away. Then one struck home, and he sank to his knees. "For God's sake, don't murder me. Don't murder me." The answer? No quarter for you federal sons of bitches. Back in town, Lawrence caught the wrath of those who believed they were avenging angels from the Almighty. Through the business district, Quantrill's men raced. Curiously, men found in the 4-story Eldridge House Hotel were taken down to the City Hotel by the river. There, Quantrill promised them protection. He did the same for all women and children. The town, however, was fair game, and so it was burned and plundered by many of Quantrill's men who were drunk with strong spirits and rage. Another hotel, the Johnson House, headquarters for the Redlegs, was marked and attacked. Any man who ventured out into the streets, gunned down. Sarah Fitch's husband was one. 2 pistols were emptied into him. Some searched for men that Quantrill had specifically designated. One was a Jayhawk preacher, Hugh Fisher, who had raided churches in Missouri. Fisher saved himself by wedging between a dirt embankment and the ceiling of his cellar. No surprise, Jim Lane was a coveted target. He fled in his nightshirt into a cornfield where he hid for hours. Meanwhile, more buildings were looted, torched. One citizen was found out on the street carrying a baby. Ordered to put the child down, he refused. When a revolver was placed to his head, he put the child on the ground and was promptly shot. Around 9 a.m., Quantrill's men headed south out of town for their dash back to Missouri. Any families or homes in their route back were hit. Behind, the bleeding, smoking, and wrecked town of Lawrence. Its burning seen some 30 miles away. And those fires claimed many. Some were burned beyond recognition. One lady was seen carrying the remains of her husband in a pail. The death toll, over 150 men and boys, more than 200 homes and businesses destroyed, an estimated $2.5 million in damages. The second largest city in Kansas, blackened, smoldering. The lingering trauma, devastating. Some women's hair turned white within days of the attack. Ewing and federal troopers gave chase, but Quantrill escaped with few casualties. And no question, the vicious will of get hit, then hit back continued. Missouri braced for a renewed round of violent retribution. When news of the massacre in Lawrence reached Richmond, the Confederate government refused to comment until they had all the facts. While the Northern press railed of massacre and Southern extolled the raid as justice served, Brigadier General Ewing acted. He ordered Union patrols to trace Quantrill's route. Anyone or thing thought to have aided his coming or going suffered. And 4 days after the attack, he signed General Order Number 11. All persons, save those known loyal within 4 Missouri border counties, some 20,000, were ordered off the land within 15 days. Soldiers, militia, redlegs gladly enforced the order. Evacuated homes burned. Anyone seen wearing a new hat, shirt, or rode a good horse, anything that may have come from pillaged Lawrence, was strung up. The roads were littered with refugees, young and old. By September the 9th, General Order 11 had been enforced to the letter. The evacuated area looked like a desert. It was a harsh act, a knee-jerk reaction. Some have called it the worst in U.S. governmental history. And by the fall of 1863, it obviously spawned more violence. A federal force, one that adopted guerrilla tactics, struck Nevada City, Missouri. Considered a bushwhackers' haven, 75 houses were torched. In response, a guerrilla, Thomas Livingston, led a group that surprised a federal foraging party of blacks and whites at Sherwood, Missouri. 16 were killed, most after surrendering. Stabbed through the hearts, heads beaten to jelly. On October the 6th, 1863, the most famous guerrilla struck again. 100 black and white federal soldiers prepared for lunch at Fort Blair in the southeastern corner of Kansas. Quantrill and his men surrounded them and moved in at noon. Attack completed, the guerrilla force began its retreat only by accident to ride into a federal column, whereupon a second attack began. The federal column slaughtered. Its wagon train looted, burned, some 85 men cut down. Nearly all shot through the head. Many shot 5 to 7 times apiece. Burned beyond recognition was a 12-year-old drummer boy. Later, a note was found near Fort Blair. It read, "Remember the dying words of James Vaughn." Seems memories of spilled blood linger. Quantrill led his men south to winter in Texas, and as bloody 1863 ended, the only constant seemed to have been violence. The social fabric, particularly on the border between the two states, was such that law and order simply did not exist. Women, many widowed or alone, dealt with painful anxiety and isolation. Towns interpreted every cloud of dust as a new wave of attackers. The town of St. Joseph, Missouri awoke one morning to find white X's painted on certain homes. All thought those living in marked homes had been targeted for death. And then word spread it was only the newsboy who was marking his route. That kind of paranoia was rampant. And if 1863 had been bad, 1864 would be worse. With the coming of the new year, 26-year-old Quantrill unbelievably lost interest in the struggle. He headed east to another border state, Kentucky, where he became a Confederate raider in the Bluegrass State. Though Quantrill was gone, there was a new leader, one of his lieutenants, 25-year-old Bloody Bill Anderson.